Jack Morgan was a rugged man in his early 50s, a farmer with a weathered face that told a lifetime of stories. He lived in a modest farmhouse nestled in the rolling hills of rural Tennessee. The house, with its peeling white paint and wooden porch, had been in Jack's family for generations. Despite his gruff exterior, Jack had a kind heart and a deep love for animals, a trait passed down from his late father. One chilly autumn morning, Jack drove his rusted Ford pickup to the local animal shelter to drop off some supplies. The shelter was run by his childhood friend, Linda, a tireless advocate for stray and abandoned animals. As he stepped into the warm, crowded space filled with the sounds of barking and meowing, Linda greeted him with a weary smile. "Jack, you're a lifesaver," Linda said, taking the bags of dog food from his hands. "We've been running low all week." Jack shrugged, his blue eyes scanning the rows of kennels. "Just doing what I can." That's when he saw him. A small, frail German shepherd pup huddled in the corner of a cage. The dog's ribs were visible under his patchy fur, and his dark eyes held a haunting mix of fear and resignation. Jack's brow furrowed. "What's his story?" he asked, nodding toward the cage. Linda sighed, leaning against the counter. "That's Max. Found him abandoned in a ditch a few weeks ago. Malnourished, barely hanging on. We've been trying to nurse him back, but he's not responding well. Vet says he's got a slim chance, and with the shelter so overcrowded, we might have to. Her voice trailed off. Jack stared at the pup, his chest tightening. The dog reminded him of Duke, the German shepherd he had as a boy, who had been his loyal companion through thick and thin. He couldn't bear the thought of this young dog not getting a fair shot. "No way you're putting him down," Jack said firmly. "I'll take him." Linda's eyes widened. "Jack, are you sure? He's in rough shape, and you've got enough on your plate with the farm." Jack knelt by the cage, extending his hand. Max lifted his head slightly, sniffing the air cautiously. "He deserves a chance," Jack said softly, "just like we all do." After some paperwork and a stern lecture from Linda about the challenges ahead, Jack carried Max to his truck, wrapping the shivering pup in an old flannel shirt. The drive home was quiet, save for the gentle hum of the engine. Jack glanced at Max, who had curled up on the passenger seat, his eyes half closed. "You'll like it out on the farm," Jack murmured. "Plenty of space, good food. You'll be back on your paws in no time." The farm was a serene expanse of open fields, dotted with hay bales and bordered by dense woods. Jack parked the truck near the barn and carried Max inside, setting him gently on a pile of straw. The barn smelled of fresh hay and earth, a comforting scent that Jack hoped would help ease Max's nerves. For the next few weeks, Jack devoted himself to Max's care. He prepared a special diet to build the dog's strength and spent hours sitting by his side, speaking in a low, soothing voice. "You're tougher than you look, buddy," he'd say, scratching behind Max's ears. Slowly but surely, Max began to improve. His appetite returned, and his coat grew thicker and shinier. He started following Jack around the farm, his tail wagging hesitantly. By the time the first snow fell, Max was a different dog, still lean, but with a spark of life in his eyes that hadn't been there before. One evening, as Jack sat on the porch with a steaming mug of coffee, Max lay at his feet, his head resting on Jack's boot. "You've got some fight in you," Jack said, smiling down at him. "We're gonna be just fine." Max wagged his tail in agreement, as if he understood every word. The bond between man and dog was undeniable, forged in those quiet moments of care and companionship. Little did Jack know, this relationship would one day save his life. The weeks that followed Max's arrival at the farm were a test of Jack's patience and resolve. Max was weak, scared, and hesitant to trust. At first, he barely ate, turning his nose up at the carefully prepared meals Jack placed in front of him. Each day, Jack would kneel down beside Max, speaking softly. "Come on, boy. You've got it in you," Jack would say, holding out a piece of boiled chicken in his calloused hand. Max would sniff cautiously, his deep brown eyes full of doubt, before reluctantly taking a small bite. Jack's neighbor, Tom, an older man who often stopped by for coffee, shook his head as he watched the pair. "Jack, you've got a heart bigger than this farm," he said one afternoon, leaning against the porch railing. "But that dog looks like he's got one paw in the grave." Jack didn't look up from where he was scratching Max's ears. "He's got more fight in him than you think," he replied, his voice steady. Despite Tom's skepticism, Jack's determination never wavered. He researched everything he could about nursing a malnourished dog back to health. The local vet, Dr. Hayes, became a regular visitor to the farm, checking on Max's progress and offering advice. "You're doing everything right," Dr. Hayes told Jack after an examination, "but I won't sugarcoat it. He's still in a fragile state. It'll take time." Jack nodded. "Time's something I've got plenty of." Max, however, didn't make it easy. He was skittish, often retreating to the barn when Jack approached too quickly. Jack learned to move slower, to sit quietly nearby, and let Max come to him. Over time, Max began to inch closer, his tail giving the faintest wag when Jack extended his hand. One particularly cold evening, Jack found Max trembling in the corner of the barn. The wind howled outside, and the temperature had dropped dramatically. Jack knelt beside him, wrapping the dog in an old blanket. "You're coming inside tonight, buddy," Jack said firmly. Max resisted at first, but Jack's gentle persistence won out. He carried Max into the farmhouse, placing him near the wood-burning stove. Max watched warily as Jack prepared a meal, the warmth of the fire slowly easing his tension. "See? Not so bad," Jack said, setting a bowl of chicken and rice in front of Max. To Jack's surprise, Max ate with more enthusiasm than he'd shown since arriving. The small victory filled Jack with hope. "You're turning a corner, aren't you?" he said, smiling. As the days turned into weeks, Max's transformation became more apparent. His ribs were no longer as prominent, his coat began to shine, and his eyes lost their haunted look. He started following Jack around the farm, his tail wagging more confidently. Jack often spoke to Max as they worked, his voice filled with affection. "You're a tough one. Max, remind me of myself a bit," Jack joked one afternoon as they fixed a broken fence. Max barked in response, his ears perking up. By the end of the second month, Max had become a permanent fixture on the farm. He greeted visitors with cautious curiosity and often accompanied Jack on his daily routines. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day, built on mutual trust and resilience. One evening, Linda stopped by to check on Max. She watched in amazement as the dog bounded toward Jack, his energy unrecognizable from the frail pup she had seen weeks ago. "I can't believe it," Linda said, shaking her head. "You've done wonders with him." Jack chuckled. "He's done most of the work. I just gave him the chance." As Linda drove away, Jack sat on the porch with Max at his side. The farm was bathed in the soft glow of twilight, the crickets beginning their nightly chorus. Jack reached down, running a hand through Max's thickening fur. "Looks like you're here to stay," Jack said softly. Max leaned into the touch, his tail thumping against the wooden porch. What neither of them knew was that their bond, forged through hardship and care, would soon face a test neither Jack nor Max could have anticipated. As winter turned to spring, Max's transformation was nothing short of remarkable. What had once been a frail, frightened pup was now a lively, energetic dog who followed Jack's every step. Max had developed an unbreakable attachment to Jack, shadowing him from the moment he woke up at dawn to the time he retired to bed at night. Jack couldn't help but marvel at Max's resilience. "You've got the heart of a fighter, boy," he often said, patting Max's sturdy back as they walked the fields together. The farm itself was a peaceful, picturesque place. Acres of golden wheat swayed in the breeze, bordered by sturdy wooden fences that Jack and Max worked together to maintain. The barn, a weathered red structure with a sagging roof, had become Max's second home. Inside, the hay bales provided a perfect perch for Max to rest after a long day of following Jack's tractor. Max had also become a protector of the farm. Any strange noises at night would send him darting out of the house, his deep bark echoing across the fields. Jack watched him one evening as Max chased off a curious raccoon. "That's my boy," Jack murmured, a smile tugging at his lips. Despite his progress, Max's journey to full recovery wasn't without challenges. One morning, Jack noticed that Max was limping slightly after their usual trek around the property. Concerned, Jack called Dr. Hayes, who arrived later that afternoon to examine him. "It's probably just a strain," Dr. Hayes said, running her hands gently over Max's leg. "Nothing serious, but he needs to take it easy for a bit." Jack nodded. Kneeling beside Max, "You hear that, buddy? Doctor's orders. Rest." Max, as if understanding, nuzzled Jack's hand, his expressive eyes full of trust. For the next few days, Jack made sure Max stayed off his feet as much as possible. He even carried him into the barn one evening, grumbling good-naturedly about how heavy Max had gotten. "You're not the little pup I brought home, that's for sure," Jack joked, setting Max down on a pile of straw. Max wagged his tail, his tongue lolling out in a doggy grin. As the weeks passed, Max regained his full strength. He became more confident and playful, often darting through the fields with boundless energy. Jack took every opportunity to teach Max new tasks around the farm. From herding the occasional stray sheep back into the pasture to retrieving tools Jack left behind, Max proved to be a quick learner. One day, as they were repairing a fence on the far side of the property, Jack wiped the sweat from his brow and turned to Mac. "You're not just my dog, you're my right-hand man." Max barked in agreement, his tail wagging enthusiastically. It was moments like these that solidified their bond, a partnership built on mutual respect and understanding. As spring gave way to the heat of summer, Max had become a beloved figure not just to Jack, but to everyone in the small rural community. The mailman, a cheerful young man named Pete, often brought treats for Max when he stopped by. "This dog's got more personality than most people I know," Pete remarked one morning, tossing Max a biscuit. Linda, who had doubted Max's chances of survival, visited frequently to check on his progress. "Jack, you've done something incredible here," she said during one visit, watching as Max chased a butterfly across the yard. "He's not just alive, he's thriving." Jack smiled, his gaze following Max. "He's got a good life now. That's all that matters." By the time the fireflies began to light up the summer nights, Max had firmly established himself as not just a farm dog, but a member of Jack's family. The farmhouse, once quiet and somber, was now filled with the sound of Max's paws on the wooden floors and his happy barks. One evening, as Jack sat on the porch with a cold beer in hand, he looked down at Max lying contentedly at his feet. "You've come a long way, Max," Jack said, his voice filled with pride. "And I couldn't be prouder." Max thumped his tail against the porch, his eyes shining with a loyalty that needed no words. Their bond was stronger than ever, a testament to the power of compassion and second chances. But neither of them could foresee the challenges that lay ahead, challenges that would test the strength of their connection in ways neither could have imagined. By the time Max was 2 years old, he had become Jack's most reliable companion. The farm was a bustling operation, and Jack relied on Max for everything from guarding the livestock to accompanying him on long days in the fields. It was as though Max had been born for this life, loyal, hardworking, and always eager to please. Jack often talked to Max as if he were another person. "You see that tractor over there?" he'd say, pointing toward the rusted old machine that always gave him trouble. "If I could teach you to drive it, I'd be out of a job." Max would tilt his head, his ears perking up as if he understood every word, before bounding off to fetch the tool Jack had left behind. Jack laughed every time. "You're smarter than half the folks I know, Max," he'd say, ruffling the dog's fur. The farmhouse, though modest, had a charm that reflected Jack's straightforward nature. The wooden floors creaked underfoot, and the walls were adorned with family photos and mementos from years gone by. One of Jack's favorite pictures hung above the fireplace, a black and white photo of him as a boy with Duke, the German shepherd who had been his childhood best friend. Now, Max had taken Duke's place, becoming not just a pet but a vital part of Jack's life. The seasons on the farm passed with a steady rhythm. Spring brought the birth of new lambs, summer was a flurry of hay baling, autumn painted the fields gold, and winter blanketed everything in a serene quiet. Through it all, Max was there, his presence a constant source of comfort and companionship. One particularly cold winter morning, Jack woke to find Max pacing by the door, his breath visible in the frigid air. "What's got you worked up, boy?" Jack asked, pulling on his boots. Max barked once, his tone urgent. Jack followed him outside. where he discovered that one of the lambs had wandered out of the barn and become stuck in a snowdrift. "Good boy, Max," Jack exclaimed as he hurried to rescue the shivering lamb. He carried it back to the warmth of the barn, with Max trotting proudly by his side. Max's protective instincts extended beyond the animals. One evening, as Jack sat on the porch enjoying the sunset, Max began growling softly. Jack followed the dog's gaze and saw a group of teenagers cutting through his field, their flashlights bouncing in the twilight. "Hey," Jack called out, his voice firm. "This is private property." The teens froze, their nervous laughter carrying across the field. Max barked sharply, standing at Jack's side like a sentinel. "Let's go," one of the kids muttered, and they quickly retreated. Jack chuckled, patting Max's head. "You're better than any security system, buddy." Their partnership wasn't without its lighter moments. Max had a knack for finding trouble, whether it was chasing the neighbor's chickens or sneaking into the kitchen to steal a slice of pie cooling on the counter. Jack would scold him half-heartedly, unable to stay mad at the dog's guilty expression. "You're lucky you're so charming," Jack would say, shaking his head. On Sundays, Jack would drive into town for supplies, and Max always insisted on riding shotgun. The townsfolk had grown fond of Max, who was a familiar sight with his head sticking out the window, ears flapping in the wind. At the general store, people often stopped to greet him, slipping him treats when they thought Jack wasn't looking. One day, Linda stopped by the farm to drop off some feed Jack had ordered. She watched as Max ran circles around Jack, barking excitedly. "You've got yourself a real partner there," she said, smiling. Jack nodded. Couldn't do it without him. As the years went by, Jack and Max's bond only deepened. They became inseparable, their days marked by a shared routine that brought both purpose and joy. Max's loyalty to Jack was unwavering, and Jack, in turn, treated Max as more than just a dog. He was family. But life on the farm was never without its challenges, and an unexpected turn was about to shake the steady rhythm they had built together. A turn that would test the strength of their partnership in ways neither could have foreseen. Life on the farm had always been demanding, but for Jack, it was also deeply fulfilling. He thrived in the early mornings, the smell of dew on the grass, and the satisfaction of a day's hard work. However, as he approached his mid-50s, Jack began to notice subtle changes in his body. Tasks that had once been second nature now left him winded and sore. His hands, once steady and strong, sometimes trembled as he held his tools. At first, Jack shrugged it off. Just getting older, he muttered to himself one evening, rubbing his aching back after mending a fence. But Max seemed to sense something was wrong. The dog began sticking closer to Jack, watching him with an almost uncanny awareness. "You don't miss a thing, do you, boy?" Jack said one afternoon, as Max followed him into the barn. Max tilted his head, his tail wagging slowly, as if encouraging Jack to keep going. The real warning sign came one crisp fall morning. Jack was hauling a bale of hay to the barn when a sudden, searing pain shot through his chest. He dropped the hay and staggered, clutching at the side of the tractor for support. Max, who had been lying nearby, sprang to his feet, barking urgently. "I'm okay," Jack wheezed, waving a hand weakly, but his legs betrayed him, and he sank to his knees. Max darted around him, barking louder, his eyes wide with panic. The commotion caught the attention of Tom, Jack's neighbor, who had stopped by to deliver some tools. Tom rushed over, helping Jack to his feet. "Jack, you're not okay," Tom said firmly. "You need to see a doctor." Jack reluctantly agreed, and Tom drove him to the nearest clinic, with Max pacing anxiously in the back of the truck. The doctor's news was sobering. Jack's heart wasn't in good shape, and he needed to slow down. "You've been pushing yourself too hard for too long," the doctor said, handing Jack a prescription for medication. "If you don't take care of yourself, it's only going to get worse." Slowing down was easier said than done. The farm needed constant attention, and Jack hated the thought of relying on others. But he couldn't deny the truth. His body wasn't what it used to be. For the first time in his life, Jack began delegating tasks to hired hands. Max, as always, was by his side, a silent source of strength. The farmhouse grew quieter in the evenings. Jack no longer had the energy to sit on the porch with a beer, watching the stars. Instead, he found himself in his armchair, a blanket draped over his legs, with Max lying faithfully at his feet. "You're gonna have to start pulling more weight around here," Jack joked one night, scratching Max behind the ears. The dog thumped his tail, his eyes full of understanding. Max's role on the farm began to shift. He took it upon himself to patrol the property more diligently, his sharp bark alerting the farmhands to any trouble. One evening, when a group of coyotes tried to sneak into the chicken coop, Max's fierce presence sent them scattering. "Good boy, Max," Jack said the next morning, his voice heavy with gratitude. "You've got my back, haven't you?" Despite his best efforts to rest and recover, Jack's condition continued to decline. His once vigorous strides turned into slow, measured steps. The farmhands began taking over more responsibilities, but Jack still insisted on overseeing their work from the porch. Max rarely left his side, his watchful eyes tracking Jack's every movement. On particularly tough days, Jack would sit by the fireplace, his hands trembling as he held a cup of tea. Max would climb onto the rug beside him, resting his head on Jack's knee. "You keep me going, Max," Jack would say, his voice thick with emotion. "Don't know what I'd do without you." As winter set in, Jack's health took another turn for the worse. A harsh bout of pneumonia left him bedridden for weeks, the once lively farmhouse now eerily silent. Max refused to leave Jack's room, lying on the floor by his bed and growling softly whenever anyone tried to coax him away. Linda visited often, bringing hot meals and helping with the farm's finances. One evening, she sat by Jack's bedside, her brow furrowed with concern. "You've got to take care of yourself, Jack," she said gently. "Max needs you." Jack nodded weakly, reaching down to pat Max's head. "We're a team," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "He's not going anywhere, and neither am I." But deep down, Jack knew the truth. He couldn't keep going the way he had been. The farm, Max, and the life he had built. It all felt fragile, as though it could slip through his fingers at any moment. What neither Jack nor Max could predict was how soon their bond would face the ultimate test, a test that would determine just how unbreakable their connection truly was. The morning was cold and gray, with a mist hanging low over the fields. It had been a somber week on the farm, as word of Jack's sudden passing spread through the tight-knit community. His death came as a shock, an apparent heart attack while he was sitting in his favorite chair on the porch. One moment, he had been gazing at the horizon with Max at his feet, and the next, he was gone. Max had been the first to sense something was wrong. Jack's unresponsive form had sent the dog into a fit of barking that alerted the farmhands. They found Jack slumped over, his coffee cup shattered on the porch floor. Max stayed beside him, whining and pawing at his lifeless hand until he was gently pulled away. Now, as preparations for the funeral began, Max seemed lost. He lingered by the porch, staring at Jack's empty chair as if waiting for him to return. The farmhands tried to console him, but Max refused to eat or leave the spot. His quiet mourning touched everyone who saw it. On the day of the funeral, the small church in town filled with people whose lives Jack had touched. Friends, neighbors, and former farmhands gathered to pay their respects to the man who had been a pillar of the community. The air was heavy with grief as they shared stories of Jack's kindness, his dedication to his farm, and his unshakable bond with Max. Linda, who had taken the lead in organizing the service, stood near the altar, her voice breaking as she recounted Jack's generosity. "He wasn't just a farmer," she said. "He was a friend to everyone. And he never gave up on anything or anyone, including Mac." Max, however, wasn't allowed inside the church. Linda had left him tied outside under the watchful eye of a farmhand. But even from his position, Max seemed restless, pacing and letting out occasional low whines. The farmhand tried to calm him, offering treats that Max ignored. As the funeral procession made its way to the cemetery, Max's unease grew. The farmhand struggled to keep him in place as the hearse carrying Jack's casket pulled away. Max barked sharply, his body straining against the leash. It was as if he understood exactly what was happening and couldn't accept it. At the cemetery, the mourners gathered around the freshly dug grave, their breath visible in the crisp air. The pastor's voice rose over the soft rustle of the wind as he delivered a eulogy that brought many to tears. The pallbearers lowered Jack's casket into the grave, and a solemn silence fell over the group. But that silence was shattered by the sound of frantic barking. Heads turned as Max came bounding into view, having slipped free from his leash. The farmhand chased after him, shouting, but Max was unstoppable. His powerful frame darted through the crowd, his eyes fixed on the casket. "Somebody grab him," a voice shouted, but no one dared move. Max's desperation was palpable, his deep, mournful cries echoing across the cemetery as he reached the gravesite. He began pawing at the casket, his strength and intensity stunning everyone present. "Max, stop!" Linda cried, rushing forward. But as she reached out to pull him away, she hesitated. There was something in Max's behavior that gave her pause, a frantic urgency that seemed beyond grief. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Max continued to paw and scratch at the casket, his bark now a guttural sound that sent shivers through the group. It was Tom who finally stepped forward. "Wait," he said, holding up a hand. "Let him be." Tom knelt beside Max, placing a hand on his back. "Easy, boy," he murmured. But Max didn't relent. His focus was unshakable, his claws scraping against the wood until, with a sudden crack, the casket's lid shifted. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Tom, his face pale, leaned closer. "Jack?" he whispered. And then, a faint sound, so faint it could have been imagined, rose from within the casket. A groan. The crowd froze, their eyes wide with disbelief. Tom's hands trembled as he worked to pry the lid open further, revealing Jack's pale, motionless form. "Jack, can you hear me?" Tom said, his voice shaking. Jack's eyes fluttered open, his chest rising and falling weakly. A ripple of shock and awe moved through the mourners. "He's alive!" someone shouted, their voice breaking with emotion. Max let out a long, mournful howl, lowering his head to rest it on Jack's chest as though to say, "I knew you were still here." Tears streamed down Linda's face as she knelt beside Jack, her hands trembling as she reached for his pulse. It was weak, but it was there. The ambulance arrived minutes later, whisking Jack away to the hospital. Max tried to follow, his loyalty unwavering, but Linda held him back. "He's going to be okay, Max," she whispered, stroking his fur. "You saved him." The crowd dispersed, their hearts heavy with the weight of what they had just witnessed. The cemetery was quiet once more, save for Max, who sat resolutely by the empty grave, his eyes fixed on the horizon, waiting for Jack to come back. Jack's miraculous return to life became the talk of the small Tennessee town. The hospital staff, overwhelmed by the unusual circumstances, quickly moved Jack into intensive care. The attending physician, Dr. Stevens, examined Jack thoroughly and provided an explanation that left the family both relieved and stunned. He suffered from a rare condition called catalepsy, Dr. Stevens explained to Linda and Tom as they waited in the sterile hospital corridor. It can mimic death, complete loss of voluntary motion, shallow breathing, and an almost imperceptible heartbeat. If it weren't for Max's persistence, we might never have realized Jack was still alive in time. Linda's hands trembled as she clasped them together. "So, he wasn't dead? He could hear us the whole time?" Dr. Stevens hesitated. "It's possible he was aware, at least partially. We don't fully understand catalepsy, but cases like this are incredibly rare." Meanwhile, Max sat anxiously in the waiting room, his ears twitching at every sound. Despite the gentle attempts of hospital staff to calm him, he refused to settle until a nurse finally led him to Jack's room. The sight of Jack, pale but alive, sent Max bounding to his side. He rested his head on Jack's bed, letting out a soft whine as Jack's weak hand moved to stroke his fur. "You never gave up on me, did you, boy?" Jack whispered, his voice hoarse but filled with emotion. Max's tail wagged gently, his eyes shining with relief. As word of the event spread, the story captured the imagination of the town, and eventually, the nation. Journalists and curious neighbors flocked to the hospital and the farm, eager to hear first-hand accounts of Max's heroics. Linda, ever protective of Jack's privacy, tried to keep the media at bay, but the story had already taken on a life of its own. "People want to know about the bond you two share," Linda said one afternoon, sitting beside Jack's hospital bed. "They're calling Max a hero." Jack, still regaining his strength, chuckled weakly. "He's more than a hero. He's my guardian angel." Max, as if understanding, let out a low, contented bark and settled beside Jack's bed, refusing to leave his side. The town came together in an outpouring of support. Neighbors brought meals to the hospital and helped manage the farm in Jack's absence. Tom took charge of the day-to-day operations, ensuring that everything ran smoothly. "We've got your back, Jack," he said during one of his visits. "Just focus on getting better." Jack's recovery was slow but steady. Physical therapy sessions helped him regain his strength, and the emotional support from friends, family, and, most of all, Max, played a significant role in his progress. Max's unwavering presence became a source of comfort and motivation for Jack, who often joked with his doctors about writing Max into his will. As the days turned into weeks, Jack began to reflect on the profound connection he shared with Max. He recalled the moment he'd first seen the fragile pup at the shelter, how close Max had been to death, and how far they'd come together. "We've saved each other in more ways than one," he said to Linda one evening, his voice thick with gratitude. By the time Jack was discharged from the hospital, he and Max had become local legends. The townsfolk gathered at the farm to welcome Jack home, cheering as the old pickup truck pulled into the driveway. Jack stepped out slowly, leaning on a cane, with Max trotting proudly beside him. "You're a miracle, Jack," Linda said, hugging him tightly. "No," Jack replied, looking down at Max with a smile. "He's the miracle," Max barked joyfully, his tail wagging furiously as he led Jack back into the farmhouse. The air was crisp and full of promise, the field stretching out before them bathed in golden light. Jack took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face and the steadfast presence of Max by his side. For the first time in weeks, life felt normal again, or as normal as it could be after such an extraordinary turn of events. But Jack knew one thing for certain. He and Max were bound by something far greater than loyalty or love. They were bound by life itself, each having pulled the other back from the brink in a way that no one else could. Jack's survival became a beacon of hope and fascination for the small Tennessee town. As news of his recovery spread, people began to gather at the local diner, the church, and the general store to discuss the miraculous events surrounding Max and his unyielding determination. "You hear about Jack Morgan?" Old Mr. Carter said one morning over coffee at the diner. "That dog of his, Max, dug him right out of the grave. Saved his life." "It's true," added Mary, the diner's owner, wiping down the counter. "Linda told me all about it. That dog just wouldn't give up. Makes you wonder how animals sense things we can't." The story took on a life of its own, and soon, reporters from nearby cities came to document the tale. Jack, however, was reluctant to step into the spotlight. He had always been a private man, content with the quiet life of a farmer, but he understood that the story wasn't just about him. It was about Max, the dog who had defied all odds to save him. "Jack," Linda said one afternoon, standing on the farmhouse porch, "the local paper wants to do a story on you and Max. It could bring attention to the shelter too. Maybe even help other animals like Max find homes." Jack scratched his chin thoughtfully, looking down at Max, who sat at his feet. "What do you think, boy? You ready to be famous?" Max wagged his tail, and Jack chuckled. "All right, let's do it. But it's got to be about him, not me." The following week, a journalist and photographer from the Knoxville Tribune arrived at the farm. Jack greeted them politely, but made it clear he wasn't one for embellishments. The journalist, a young woman named Emily, was captivated by the bond between Jack and Max. "Can you tell me about that day?" Emily asked as she set up her recorder. "What was Max doing when it all happened?" Jack leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant as he recalled the details. "Max wouldn't stop barking. I was sitting in the graveyard, looking down at him, thinking about how much he'd done for me over the years. And then, just like that, he started clawing at the casket. He knew. He just knew something wasn't right." As Jack spoke, Max sat by his side, his gaze steady and unwavering. The photographer snapped a picture of the two of them, the light catching the streaks of gray in Jack's beard and the glossy sheen of Max's coat. The article was published a week later, titled A Farmer's Best Friend, The Dog Who Saved a Life. It painted a vivid picture of Jack's near-death experience, Max's heroic instincts, and the deep connection that had formed between them over the years. The story quickly gained traction, and soon, Jack and Max became the subjects of statewide attention. The town rallied around Jack and Max, organizing fundraisers for the local animal shelter in Max's honor. Linda was overwhelmed by the support. "We've never seen anything like this," she said at one of the events. Max's story is reminding people just how much animals can do for us if we give them a chance. Meanwhile, Jack found himself inundated with letters, phone calls, and even gifts from strangers who had been moved by the story. Some sent toys and treats for Max, while others shared their own experiences of loyalty and love with their pets. One letter, in particular, stood out to Jack. It came from a young boy named Ethan, who wrote, "I'm scared of dogs, but my mom read me your story, and now I think I'd like to meet one someday." Max sounds like a hero. Jack smiled as he read the letter aloud to Max, who wagged his tail in approval. "Looks like you're changing lives, buddy," Jack said, folding the letter and tucking it into his pocket. The town's reaction brought a sense of renewed energy to the farm. Visitors often stopped by to catch a glimpse of Max, who handled the attention with calm dignity. Jack, though grateful for the support, remained focused on what mattered most: his recovery and his bond with Max. As the months passed, the story began to fade from the headlines, but its impact lingered. The farm was quieter again, and Jack found comfort in the return to his familiar routines. Every morning, he and Max would walk the fields together, the rhythm of their steps a reminder of the life they had fought so hard to preserve. "I owe you everything, Max," Jack said one morning, kneeling to scratch behind the dog's ears. "And I'll spend the rest of my days making sure you know it." Max barked softly, his eyes full of a loyalty that needed no words. Together, they stood in the golden light of the morning, their bond unbroken and their story one that would never be forgotten. Months after the extraordinary events, life on the farm had mostly returned to normal. Jack, still recovering his strength, had adjusted to a slower pace of life. Max remained his constant companion, his watchful eyes never straying far from Jack's movements. The farmhouse, with its weathered charm, had become a symbol of resilience. The once peeling paint had been refreshed by a group of volunteers who had come together to support Jack during his recovery. The porch, where Jack had so often sat with Max at his feet, now held a new chair, sturdy and comfortable, a gift from the community. On a warm summer evening, Jack found himself sitting on that very chair, staring out at the fields that had been his life's work. Max lay beside him, his head resting on Jack's boots. The cicadas hummed in the distance, and the smell of freshly cut hay hung in the air. "I've been thinking a lot, Max," Jack said, his voice quiet but steady. "About what happened. About what you did for me." Max's ears perked up at the sound of Jack's voice, his tail thumping softly against the porch. "You knew, didn't you?" Jack continued, his gaze distant. "You knew I wasn't gone. I don't know how, but you did. You wouldn't let them bury me, and because of you, I'm still here." Jack leaned down, running a hand through Max's thick fur. The dog looked up at him, his expressive eyes full of understanding. It was a moment of unspoken gratitude, a bond so profound that it didn't need words. The town's fascination with Max's heroics had waned, but the people closest to Jack continued to marvel at the connection between man and dog. Linda often visited, bringing fresh-baked pies and sitting with Jack on the porch. She had become a close confidant, her admiration for Max only growing with time. "Do you ever wonder why he did it?" Linda asked one evening, sipping a glass of sweet tea. Jack shook his head with a soft smile. "I don't wonder. I know. Max and we've been through so much together. He's more than a dog. He's family." Linda nodded, her eyes misting over. "You're lucky to have each other. Not everyone gets a second chance like this." Jack chuckled. Luck had nothing to do with it. It was all Mac. As Jack's health improved, he began to reflect on how the experience had changed him. He started to appreciate the smaller moments, the warmth of the sun on his face, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, and, most of all, the steady companionship of Max. The farm work continued, but Jack took care to pace himself, leaning on hired hands for the tasks that were once second nature. Max, for his part, seemed to have taken on the role of Jack's protector. He patrolled the farm with renewed vigor, barking at anything that seemed out of place. The farmhands often joked that Max was the true boss of the operation. "Don't let him fool you," Jack would say with a grin. "He runs this place better than I ever could." One evening, as Jack sorted through a stack of mail, he came across another letter. This one was from a woman in California who had read about Max in the newspaper. She wrote about her own struggles with isolation and how Max's story had inspired her to adopt a rescue dog. Jack read the letter aloud to Max, who wagged his tail in approval. "Looks like you're a role model now, too," Jack said, chuckling. "Don't let it go to your head." The letter made Jack realize just how far-reaching Max's impact had been. What had started as a simple act of loyalty had grown into something much larger, a story of hope, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between man and animal. Jack decided to write back to the woman, sharing his gratitude for her words and encouraging her to cherish the new bond she was forming with her dog. It was a small gesture, but it felt important, a way to pay forward the gift that Max had given him. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the fields in shades of orange and gold, Jack looked down at Max, who was now dozing peacefully at his feet. "You've changed everything, you know that?" Jack said softly. Max stirred, letting out a contented sigh. Jack smiled, leaning back in his chair. The farm was quiet, the air filled with the sounds of nature settling in for the night. In that moment, Jack felt a deep sense of peace, a rare and precious gift that he knew he owed entirely to the dog by his side. As the seasons passed, Jack's life became a testament to resilience and gratitude. His health stabilized, though he never fully regained the stamina he once had. Instead of lamenting the changes, Jack embraced the slower pace of life, finding joy in moments that might have once gone unnoticed. Max remained his steadfast companion, growing even more attuned to Jack's needs. The bond they shared had become almost legendary in the small Tennessee town, where their story continued to inspire others. For Jack, though, it was less about heroics and more about the simple, profound connection they had forged. One cool autumn morning, Jack found himself walking the edge of the fields with Max at his side. The golden light of sunrise stretched across the horizon, casting long shadows over the rows of crops. Jack paused, leaning on the fence, and looked out at the land he had worked for most of his life. "You know, Max," he said, breaking the quiet, "this farm's seen a lot of life and a lot of loss. But through it all, we've made it, haven't we?" Max wagged his tail, sitting beside Jack and pressing his warm body against his leg. Jack smiled and scratched behind Max's ears, his hand lingering as if to reassure himself that the dog was really there. The legacy of their story extended far beyond the boundaries of the farm. Linda's shelter saw a surge in adoptions after Max's tale became public, with families coming from all over to give abandoned animals a second chance. Linda often credited Max for the shelter's success. "He's proof of what a little love and persistence can do," she said during one of her visits to the farm. Jack didn't argue. "Max taught me more about life than I ever taught him," he said simply. Occasionally, Jack would receive letters from people who had read about Max or seen the brief documentary a local filmmaker had created about their story. Each letter carried a common thread: hope. People wrote about finding strength in Max's loyalty and Jack's determination, about how their story reminded them to cherish the bonds they shared with their own pets and loved ones. One such letter came from a young veteran who had adopted a German Shepherd after struggling with post-traumatic stress. "Your story gave me the courage to let someone in," the letter read. "Now I can't imagine life without Rex. Thank you, and thank Max too." Jack kept the letters in a wooden box on the mantel, occasionally reading through them on quiet evenings. They were a reminder of how far-reaching Max's impact had been and how much good had come from a bond that began with a single act of kindness. In the end, the story of Jack and Max became more than just a tale of survival. It was a story of redemption and the extraordinary ways in which love can transcend even the darkest moments. For Jack, Max wasn't just a dog. He was a partner, a protector, and a symbol of hope. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned a soft shade of pink, Jack sat on the porch with Max lying at his feet. The farm was quiet, save for the distant hum of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. Jack reached down and patted Max's head. "You've given me more than I ever thought I deserved," Jack said softly. "And I'll never stop being grateful." Max wagged his tail, his eyes half closed in contentment. Together, they watched the world settle into twilight, their bond as unshakable as the land beneath their feet. For Jack and Max, it wasn't about the extraordinary events that had brought them to this point. It was about the quiet, enduring partnership they shared, one moment at a time. And so, their story became a lasting legacy, a reminder to all who heard it of the power of loyalty, love, and second chances. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell, and if you've watched this far, comment "I watched until here" and share your thoughts about this story. Oh, and don't forget to watch the next video appearing on the end screen. It's truly exciting.